And- Oh, thank you. Great. Sifan's just started the recording. We just had a quick round of introductions to see who's here. And we're also aware of a number of you who won't be here live, but who've said that you're waiting for the recording and you're looking forward to joining us live in later sessions. It's really great to be here with you all. And the reason that we are all here is that, well, I can't say for you, but the reason I believe we're mostly here is because we feel in our hearts that education should be something that supports thriving. It's just logical. You know, education should help us become more of who we are in a way that is healthy and supportive and feels good. And it's not necessarily working like that, whether we're a parent, whether we're a teacher, whether we are still sort of subject to a school system or to a homeschool situation as a young person. There's a lot of people not actually thriving, not actually happy, not actually finding this a joyful, empowering experience right now. And we know in our hearts that can be transformed. And sometimes it just takes the right insight, the right aha as to what's going wrong so that we can also see what to do about it. So before we go into sharing our ideas, we thought that we could start by having a little bit of a look together at what are some of the reasons from your own experience why school or homeschool isn't or hasn't worked out so well so far. And, you know, whether you are an adult supporting young people, or it's your own thriving that's the problem, or the thriving of the young people around you that's the problem. I'm going to pop up a whiteboard. I'm hoping that you can see a little taskbar that allows you to click on a T for text. If you can just let me know if you can see that taskbar, otherwise I might have to do a lot of dictation if you can't see it. So there's a little T, and then you can click the T and then click the board, and then you should be able to type in your little board. Are you able to do that? I see you all moving around on the board. Are you able to actually edit in? Ah, I see, yes. There we go. That's great. All right, so then you can pop on a reason that you feel it hasn't worked out well for this reason. We're not thriving because of this reason. If you have difficulty typing, you can just pop it in the chat and then we'll paste it across for you. Or you can even switch on your mic and we'll take dictation. I'm going to, in the meantime, add a couple of reasons that I've been told by young people. Is anybody managing to edit?
I think I'll just put it in the chat because I'm not able to add anything. It seems like.
All right, if you pop it in the chat and then I'll paste it across.
I'm gonna also pop mine in the chat just because I can't seem to figure how to get the text on there.
Right, that's fine. If you just pop it into the chat, we'll bring it along. Yeah. So Sifaan is suggesting that it might be about having the latest Zoom version as possible. Okay. Other reasons? Yeah.
I didn't manage to do anything, so I think it is not working for me.
Okay. Have you been able to put it into the chat? Do you know where to find the chat? So down on your taskbar at the bottom of your Zoom, you should be able to see a little chat. Just look, what does it look like? It just looks like a little speech bubble. And then if you click on that, then that should bring you into the chat. Otherwise, if you would like to just verbally, I will take dictation. Just tell me what I can write. All right, did I get everybody's thing pasted in? Because we've got quite a bit now. So let's just quickly review what we've got here. So some of the reasons that people aren't thriving or the kids are not thriving as students or as supporters of other people. Not being able to cope with the work, feeling like I'm stupid or something is wrong with me. Boredom, bullying, don't like the stuff being taught. Toxic socialization environment with top-down interactions rather than horizontal and respectful interactions. Schools don't respect many children's rights. The rules and conditions to attend are ableist and not neurodiverse friendly. Schools are based on adult society's needs, not on children's needs. Boring and not engaging, waste of time, homework, have to do what is told, like it or not, exams. And I see there's another one in the chat there. Let's just quickly pop that up as well. Right, we can. And here we go. From my very short experience working with government employees who are supposed to support my daughter, I've seen many flaws to an education system that's already broken and a system that doesn't support neurodiverse children with exceptional needs. I've also heard from other parents and even teachers within the school boards that a child like mine would unfortunately fall through the cracks because there is simply no resources, funding, and support. Yeah, very common problem. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an overview of where we are beginning. And now let's move into having a look at briefly who I am and who Sifaan is a little bit more than we did in the intro. in terms of how do we come to be in a position where we feel like we have something to share with you. So we don't want to spend too much time on this, so just a little glimpse. So for myself, I hated school and I didn't do well there. Hang on one second. Sifaan, do you know how I close this whiteboard without making it go away? Because this new version I've never worked with before, I would normally just press save whiteboard.
I think you can close it, but it will still be there in a dashboard.
It'll still be there. Okay. So I hated school. I did well at school. I was an achiever. A lot of people looking from the outside would have said that I was one of the kids for whom school worked. But I had post-traumatic stress syndrome for a year afterwards. And, you know, my nice high marks and English prizes and deputy head girls and all of that didn't give me the positive experience that people would have assumed they would have. But I thought it was me. I thought there was something wrong with me. And when I started working with young people around their environmental rights in a participatory way, I got to see firstly how much wisdom and insight they had, and I was reminded of that. And then secondly, I got to see that just, you know, actually the majority of the children, in fact, all of the children that I personally encountered did not enjoy school. Even those who were doing okay, there was always something that was not ideal. So I realized it wasn't me. And since then, I've been on about a 20-year journey into alternative education. And I've shifted a lot of my thinking and perception around what education is. And that's enabled me to start thriving in my own learning and actually heal out my school experience and become a true lifelong learner. It's also enabled me to support an education for my own two kids where they've self-directed all the way and absolutely thrived. My eldest is now 18 and I'm just amazed with what he's managed to do with his time. And it's also enabled me to support other kids through our startup Riverstone Village, as well as now for the last 6 years supporting parents and facilitators in being able to also support kids in thriving. So I've directly seen this shift from this scenario where school and education and all of this is kind of mostly miserable to this actually empowered, enjoying lifelong learning, thriving thing. And I know that shift is possible. So that's how I come to you. And Sifaan?
So I also appear to do well in school. I got good grades. I have represented Sri Lanka at international programming events. I won medals. I have a first-class engineering degree from Sri Lanka's leading engineering faculty. But then, have I really thrived? I mean, I have never made use of the engineering subjects that I spent almost 5 years of my life studying. I'm only now sort of realizing what kind of impact that experience of being in the system has had on my personality. But also, I think it isn't quite accurate to say that I spent 5 years studying engineering. I was in university for 5 years, but I actually didn't spend a great deal of time studying engineering. I was doing other things, including actually self-directing my education in a totally non-engineering way. And that actually enabled me to build almost 2 decade practice as a corporate trainer. And then 3 years ago, I co-founded with my wife Dilip was on this call, Sri Lanka's first democratic school, which is also based on self-directed education. And I think it's interesting that I came to this from a non-educational or non-teaching background, because if I had, I doubt very much that I would have started this school or that I would be here in this session. It's somehow the virtue of those experiences that I've had that has given me certain insights that I hope to be sharing in these 4 sessions with you.
Great, thank you. So looking at all of the reasons that were shared earlier on the board when we asked sort of what do you think the problems are, just confirms for me personally yet again that I think Sifaan and I are on the right track. We still see the same thing underlying all of the reasons that have come up today. And that reason is that school as we know it, even school at home, don't give a lived experience of full human rights. Now, that might sound a bit of a kind of a weird abstract thing to say, but once that aha is expanded, it starts to just kind of really make a huge amount of sense, and in a very, very practical way, give us an idea of what we can actually do about it. So I'm going to hand over to Sifaan now to, first of all, talk a little bit about the human rights in its own right. And then I'll be taking that and creating the link between that and our lived daily reality. How does this concept thing actually play out when we look at what it means to be a human and what it means to thrive? So over to you, Sifaan.
Right. So when it comes to education and rights, generally education is seen as a right that enables other rights. So a sentence that you'd often come across in the human rights conversation is that having an education helps people to access all of their other human rights. So I'm just wondering, what do you all think about this? Because I'm screenshotting, I don't really see the chat, but if anybody would like to speak out any thoughts of this, or I can put it in the chat and Je'anna can read it out. So do you agree with this idea that education enables other rights because having an education helps us to access other human rights? So do you have any disagreement with that? Okay, maybe not. So I'll just move on.
I was going to say something, but I see Baron isn't muted, so I was waiting.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think to me, it's not so much education that helps people access their human rights. It's actually having their human rights respected that helps them access their human rights. So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to interrupt where you were going with that.
Right. Okay. Dilip has shared that this is what she thought for a long time as well. So I agree also with what Sylvie said. And what for me is missing in this is that, okay, so once you have the education, you access all of your other rights, but what about your rights while you're being educated? That is not said in this sentence at all. And one of the things that is said about me is that I'm very pedantic and looking into details and specific of words, but sometimes the way we use words also reveal our underlying thinking. And I think in this case, it is true that the way this is framed is because there isn't that much focus on human rights while the education is happening. And this is the picture that showed up on my Facebook a few weeks back. And there's a kid playing in the mud or something like that. And if there's a quote that says, if a child cannot learn in the way we teach, then we must teach in a way the child can learn. So any reflections or thoughts on this? I mean, not particularly specifically about what the child is doing, but more about the quote. Do you sort of agree with this or disagree? And why do you either agree or disagree?
Fabian saying in the chat, there's an assumption that children learn because we teach them. Yep.
at first glance, this looks like a statement that is very child-centric, that our
Yeah,
it-
she's
it
adding,
appears-
sorry, she's
Sorry.
adding that perhaps it should be they learn despite our teaching. And Sylvie said, I think we need to get out of the way and let them learn rather than teach them. And Dilepa also echoed what Fabienne said. In reality, they learn despite of teaching. Yeah.
So this sentence sounds like it's very child-centric, that we must teach in a way that the child can learn. But by actually being centered around the act of teaching and assuming that the teaching doesn't happen in any other way, it isn't really child-centric. But we'll come back to this picture later. I'm going to take you through a small evolution of the education rights discourse. Started from the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, coming to the Convention of the Rights of the Child in 1989. And so 1948, this said, and by the way, the UDHR was the first time in that education was internationally recognized as a right. Some countries may have done it in the past, but collectively this is the first time. And it says that education shall be directed to the full development of human personalities, strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. And this sentence is repeated in 1960 in the Convention Against Discrimination in Education, in 1966 in the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and in the CRC. So it seems a really nice thing. I mean, who would not want education to strengthen respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms? But it's only that education shall be directed to. So at the end of education, people will respect human rights and fundamental freedoms. But are there human rights respected in the process of education is not mentioned. Taking another example, so in 1948, they said that parents choose the kind of education for their children. This could be tacitly understood to be tacitly supporting homeschooling or schooling outside of education outside of schools. But from the drafting minutes, I would say it is not that they were supporting it. It's just that the modern homeschooling movement hadn't really taken off by then, so they didn't, I think, really need to specify it. But by the time it came to 1960, choose the kind of education had become choose for their children institutions other than the public school. So now schooling equals education is explicitly assumed. Early it was only implicitly assumed. And by the time the CRC came out in 1989, they are now saying we have to encourage regular attendance at schools. Like this is as part of rights. So this means that the idea that schooling is equivalent to education has now become entrenched. So from a certain perspective, this is nice. We want children to have an education, but it's projecting this idea that institutional schooling is inherently virtuous. And I think Je'anna will talk more about why that is not necessarily so. And we saw some of your reasons also at the start. Another example, in the CRC 1989, there are many rights that are especially assigned to children, including the freedom of expression, the freedom of conscience, freedom of association, privacy, social security, standard of living, many really nice things. But these are fundamental freedoms that are already in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which starts off by saying all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So then why was it necessary to have another treaty expressly giving these rights to people who are less than 18? So, I mean, when they said that the aim of education was respect fundamental freedom, did it really mean that children are learned to respect something that they didn't themselves actually enjoy during their childhood? So on this, I'm inclined to take a charitable view that they may have meant the UDHR to be for everybody, but it wasn't actually working that way, so it needed some kind of affirmative action. I'm hoping that they work when they said born free, that it included children as well. Another story in this is that, and this is for me a very interesting one, in the CRC, it says that third party shall assure to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views, the right to express those views and for them to be given due weight and things. But this construction, to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views, it's a bit strange, right? Because who is deciding whether the child is capable of forming a view? Because it can't be the child, right? If the child has formed a view, then by definition, the child is capable of forming a view. So this must be somebody else who's deciding. And if someone else is coming to tell this child that, hey, you are not capable of forming your own view, it's gaslighting, right? So the UNCRC is actually encouraging children to be gaslit. So why is there such a discrepancy between the lived human rights experience of children, and especially children in education, and what rights are claiming to be? And I think it is because children were seen as chattel, not as human beings. And as an example, African Americans were chattel slaves. So in the Declaration of Independence, when several slave owners proudly declared that it's a self-evident truth that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that all men did not include men of color, because they were property, they were not human beings, so they were not really men. And women were also really seen as chattels. So it's kind of odd or strange that in theory, African Americans got the right to vote in 1870, 50 years before women got the right to vote in 1920. In practice, it wasn't as simple as that. To get the vote in practice took much later, but both of these are because Black people, women, indigenous people were seen as somehow subhuman or property or chattel. They were not worthy of full human rights. So the narrative is getting a bit better recently. For example, in 2009, the Committee on the Rights of the Child, in a general comment, said that we have to presume that the child has the capacity to form their own views. The child does not have to first prove their capacity. They realized that 20 years back, they sort of made a mistake in putting that line in, so they kind of revoked that. But unfortunately, people don't read gender comments quite as much as they read the original treaty. So not everybody is necessarily aware of these finer points. And in 2001, they had also said that issue about are you only learning about human rights after? It said that children should also learn about human rights by seeing it implemented in practice. So there is some recognition of the value of the lived experience, but it's a nice to have optional. By 2009, it was a bit stronger. They had recognized that human rights can only shape motivations and behaviors only when human rights are practiced. So now they are giving more importance or primacy to the lived experience. But and in 2011, the UN Declaration of Human Rights in Education and Training separately distinguished learning about human rights, learning through human rights, and learning for human rights. So there is some evolution of how this is spoken about, but what is it now, 12, 13 years after that, none of these things are really happening in practice, because I would say, if anything, the violation of children's human rights in school is getting worse. There is more coercion happening and less space for rights to be enjoyed, even though this is also going on, at least in some documents. And the reason for this it's, I mean, in English, we have the phrase "the elephant in the room" when there's something really big and obvious, but nobody's talking about it. And I think in this case, there is actually an invisible elephant because there's something that's there that's so big that ought to be obvious, but we can't see it. And what actually happens is we're trying to walk around the room and we kind of suddenly hit a wall because there's an elephant in the way and we can't see it, or we might trip on the trunk and we don't understand what we tripped on and why we fell because we can't see this. But this tripping up also happens in the words we use. I'm going to share a few examples of that. So this is from 2007 Human Rights-Based Approach for Education for All, right? And it has some nice things at the start. In good program, it is recognized that people cannot be developed. They must develop themselves. Children, young people, and other learners should be recognized as key actors in their own education and development, rather than passive beneficial services and transfers of commodities. But then a few pages later, it goes on to say, teachers, it is teachers who have the most impact on the day-to-day experience of children in school. A quality education in which children want to take part is dependent on the commitment, enthusiasm, creativity, and skill of teachers. So, like for me, the language here gets confusing because if people must develop themselves, why is it called good programming, right? And if people must develop themselves, how is it that teachers are the ones who have the most impact on the day-to-day experience? I would say it's children who have the most impact on their day-to-day experience. And the quality education depends on teachers only if we don't recognize other forms of learning or other sources of learning. So this is getting back to that picture. This picture was written from a teacher's point of view because if I'm a teacher, it's my identity, right? I'm being paid to teach. It is the designation that I identify as. I may have a license to teach. I may have training to teach. And if I'm not teaching, why am I here? What's the value of the role I'm performing? And usually people will also want to be in whatever role they do to have an identity of being doing their job well. So if I'm a teacher, I want to be seen as a good teacher. And as a good teacher, then I'm going to teach in a way the child can learn. And this belief is something I call teacher saviorism. So like you have white saviorism, where white people believe they have to like rescue people of color who can't save themselves. The teacher saviorism is that children cannot learn without this immense sacrifices and contribution of teachers, and that's why we are so important. And this is such a powerful part of education that even a child who fails every single subject in the examination will learn this lesson that learning is dependent on teaching. So, very recent one, 2022 report on the Transformation Education Summit. It says in one place that all human beings are born to learn continuously to survive, live, and thrive. Right? So it's recognizing that we are born to learn and will continuously learn, and that learning takes place through institutional, intentional, and family education, as well as informally in families, communities, other spaces. And then it goes on to identify 4 key areas in which transformative education must support learners. And one of them is learning to learn so that they can learn better. So what is it that they are really trying to say here? Because if we are born to learn, what does learning to learn having mean? And they're saying one of the things that we have to be equipped with in order to learn is curiosity. But the engine of being born to learn is the curiosity. It can't be something equipped from outside. Right? But we could certainly stop unequipping it, which is something that happens a lot in education. And it's also interesting that they talk about must support every learner, equip every learner, right? So who is this learner? If all of us are learning, why do we need to have this label of learn? I mean, all of us are breathing, but we don't call ourselves breathers, right? The only reason we need to identify somebody as a learner is because we need to justify the existence of somebody who is the teacher or the educator, right? And another word that I want to introduce into this is paternalism. And on one hand, it's the paternalistic attitude of adults towards children, and the idea that unless we adults lead the way and teach them, intentionally teach them, then they wouldn't learn. But it's also there between the state and the individual. So that's why in this first paragraph, the main honor goes to the institutionalized and intentional and planned system, and the informal stuff is an as well as nice to have. And even the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education last year sort of grudgingly acknowledged that and said it is primarily education, not schooling, that is compulsory. So homeschooling may therefore be considered as part of educational freedom. So it's not really seen as equal. I mean, there's this assumption that something that is provided by the state must be the superior product. But okay, if you really want to do this, then maybe we should let you do this kind of attitude is coming through. So to sort of summarize or wrap up on that, there has been a big evolution in the discourse of rights from where we were in 1948 to where we are now. But this attitude of seeing children as full human beings still hasn't come into play. I mean, on paper, it happened in 1989. In practice, in many contexts, it hasn't happened yet. And this is why it's also interesting that people like Janusz Korczak and A.S. Neal had a very strong message on children's rights and respecting children when they started their schools about 100 years ago. So they were very much ahead of the times when it came to understanding the rights of children. The rest of the world is still not catching up. I mean, there's a very small number of people, I think, who are engaging in this discourse on the rights and seeing things this way. But the lived experience of children is not catching up to this discourse yet. So, Je'anna, over to you now.
Thank you, Sifaan. So, yeah, so there's our overview of what rights are and what the history is and how there's a kind of a deepening commitment to trying to ensure that rights are respected and embodied in education, but it isn't happening yet. But what does that have to do with thriving? Because I think the way that most of us experience rights, we didn't ourselves get to have a lived experience of our rights as young people. So it can feel all a little bit abstract. And, you know, what has this got to do with a child being miserable in school? So the missing link is what I would like to focus on. And it's kind of an obvious link once we notice it. It's just that, you know, the way that we live our lives, it's not obvious that we will notice it. So I think I'm going to use that whiteboard again in a minute. Let me just see. Yeah, in fact, even just let me use the whiteboard even just to put up a couple of notes first of all before we get interactive with it again. So let's go for the existing whiteboard, but let's change the page perhaps so that we keep everything together. I'm just waiting for it to load. Okay, it looks like we created this one here. Yeah. Okay, so you definitely have edit permission. We won't use that just right now, but in a minute again, I will be suggesting we do that. Now I want to just add a page. Let's add a page. So the reason that there's this link is that human rights aren't random. somebody didn't suck them out of their thumb. They're kind of logical. And that's also why you get that wording in that Sifaan referred to earlier. It is a self-evident truth that we all have these rights. What makes that self-evident? And the reason that that is self-evident and obvious, and the same for every person in the whole world of any age, is that every human deserves to thrive. And that can only happen when core needs are met. If you think, for example, of a plant is only going to thrive if it gets water and it gets the right amount of sunlight for its type and it's got the right soil. When its core needs are met, it will thrive. When it doesn't get water, it will not thrive. When the soil is wrong, it will not thrive. Humans are the same. We've got fundamental needs that are common to every human in the world. And when those are met, we thrive. And when they are, well, it's never a one on or off. When they are less effectively met, we will thrive less. When they are more effectively met, we will thrive more. So these human needs are, and there's actually some quite interesting research on this that I'm just going to touch on so lightly because otherwise we could be here for several sessions. These are the core needs that every single human in the whole world shares. We all have a need to feel competent, and it's a subjective thing. It's not about somebody else being able to say that I'm competent. It's about me feeling like I can do it. I can manage something. I'm okay. I'm good enough. I'm capable. There's stuff I can do. It's also a core need for me to be autonomous, to feel like I can do it myself. I matter in my own right. I am not just an object or a chattel. I have some power. I have some ability to choose and shape my life. We also all have a need to belong and connect and have other people be able to contribute to us and for us to be able to contribute to other people. We all have a need for dignity, to feel that we are good enough, that we are not shameful, that there is nothing fundamentally wrong with us. And of course, all of that is also founded on every single person has a need to feel safe. We don't thrive when we feel that we're about to become extinct, when we feel like we're under threat of severe attack. That doesn't support our thriving. I'm not going to go into where these core needs come from in research, because as I say, that's just beyond the scope of this call. But if you work with me for any extent of time, or you look at some of the videos that I've already got up, you can find more information on these needs and how we came to identify them. There's actually been a huge amount of research, as well as just common sense. When you think about it carefully, it is obvious. And then how do these map onto rights? There's actually a direct correspondence. So, for example, I'm not going to go through every single right in the UDHR and the UNCRC, but just for an example, a few examples. So the right to safety shows up in rights such as the right to life. We're safe from death. People aren't allowed to just come along and randomly kill us, right? Be safe from torture, for example. The right to a fair trial, so that we can't be victimized by people using what do they call it? I think in South Africa it's called vexatious litigation, using the courts to try and actually harass and harm somebody. We all have a right to a certain standard of living. For example, we all have the right to eat and have food. Then dignity. We've got that addressed with clauses such as there shall be no slavery, no discrimination, there shall be equality for all. The need for relatedness is acknowledged in human rights documents with things like freedom of association, the right to marriage and family, the right to nationality. For children, they talk about the right to a name, for example, the right to belong and have some choice about who one lives with if the parents are not together. And then autonomy is a very, very strong driver of many rights and the whole concept of rights. You know, life, liberty, and happiness is sort of safety, autonomy, and I mean, happiness comes from the combination of all of these needs being met. But directly, autonomy and things like freedom of movement, freedom of thought, belief, expression, the need for privacy, sorry, the right to privacy, all of these are enshrinements of this need for autonomy, and these rights make sure that gets met. And then our need for competence gets expressed in rights such as the right to work, the right to education, and the right to play. And the right to play actually speaks to a number of these, which is again something that's beyond the scope of today to completely go into in any depth, but it's very core to my work if you stay with me. So now let's whiteboard together. Now that I've just given that little bit of input, I'll open us a new page and let's just play a little bit of game. Where's the new page? Adding another page over here. So now let's whiteboard a little bit together the same way. I can take dictation, I can paste it from the chat, but how does school or homeschool currently fail at adequately meeting these needs for kids and or supporting adults? So at the moment, in what way do we not see competence, that need for feeling of competence supported? In what ways doesn't that process support autonomy? How doesn't it support a feeling of relatedness and connection and dignity and safety? So I invite you to post them up. I don't know if we can sort of stack them under the columns. Might be possible. In fact, I'll just widen these a little bit. Oh no, it doesn't. Maybe I can widen that, yeah. There we go. And yeah, let's try and stack them under the columns. Otherwise, if necessary, we can just discuss them. But I invite you to go ahead and let's brainstorm a little bit here. And it is now open. If you're popping it in the chat, no, yeah. Okay, so Dilipa's asking questions about the universal human rights. We're not going to go into that, but that's not the direct source, no. Okay, so if you're putting into the chat something you'd like me to transcribe for you, then please just let me know which column you'd like it to be under. I'm going to add a few as well. Okay. Right, I'm typing some things across from the chat as well here. Okay. Oh, you can't see the columns, only the first page. Is there a way to move to the second page? Is everybody having that problem?
I think we have to move to the second page ourselves. There is on the bottom right, there should be like a number. One thing, if you click on that, you can select the pages you want to go to. So if you go to page 3, you'll see, but I think each person has to do that.
Yeah, you see, this is a whole new whiteboard format that I have never worked with before. So I see that down in the corner, yeah, bottom right-hand corner there, there's a little stack of pages there. Okay, excessive teaching to test and set curriculum which kills curiosity. Where would you like me to stack that? Fabienne?
I don't know because I can't see the column, Je'anna, sorry.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so let me also just pop there in the chat. I'm just going to give you the competence. I mean, I think that I love your comment, and I think it could go in a few places. Honestly, it's some things are just very actually intersectional in that they speak to quite a few of these all at once. So, I mean, kind of picking a column is a little bit also fake, but so yeah, I'm actually going to suggest, Sylvie, that we put permission required to go to the bathroom under dignity and eat and rest. It's under autonomy and dignity, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
But given that we don't really have much under dignity yet, I'm going to pop it there. Oops. Just trying to see, also navigating my own screen here. And yeah. Okay. Yeah, uniforms. Uniforms, absolutely. Has anybody got any thoughts on safety? So I'm actually going to put this comment of yours, Fabienne, under safety, because it could go again on many of the different columns. But one of the things that people have started realizing is that a punitive, coercive system that demands young people submit to the demands of adults is one of the reasons why so much physical violence and sexual abuse is able to take place in educational settings, because children are put into a situation where it is routine for them to submit to the demands of adults, even if those demands are uncomfortable and unreasonable. Where do you draw the line? So I'm putting that under safety. So yeah, I'm going to add also here dyslexia as one example that is very close to my heart under competence, because I don't want to go into that also with beyond the scope, but you know, your average dyslexic brain is brilliant, and it's made to feel completely incompetent, which is just crazy. Okay. Yes, Fabienne, this is exactly how our empires used to rule. You've got one of the keys there, because school was used as one of the active tools of empire, and that's one of the ways that it got to be done in this form all around the globe and normalized, was because of empire. And that's kind of what we're dealing with now. Is now we want to make it something else, but people are used to that. Okay, I'm going to give this 2 more minutes. Ah, yes, you can't talk to each other freely and can't choose who they associate with, limited in how they interact with others based on status. Yeah, I'm going to put that, yeah, definitely under relatedness there, Sylvie. I hope I'm catching everything. If you don't see your point coming up, then please heads up me that, you know, you're welcome to just unmute. We're not an enormous session. You can just unmute and speak as well. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So safety means different things for different people. And we need environments that allow for different people's needs in terms of their need to feel safe in their own way that not everyone can relate to. Okay. Has anybody put something there that I have missed? Otherwise, you can carry on adding, but I'm going to start reading through them. Okay. All right. Oops. These whiteboards are also massive. You have to kind of move around to the right place on them. I'm not sure I'm a fan of this innovation. I think I kind of like the simpler one. All right, so under competence so far, we could carry on with this exercise for a week. I don't know if you can see that, but I sure can. But competence, kids are constantly marked and assessed by someone else, assessed by an outside party, not the self, which means that you're constantly also learning that you are wrong when you thought you were right. So that's very undermining of your sense of competence. I thought it was this way, and now I've got this big cross on it. Like, oops, I thought I knew the stuff, and now I realize I don't. Tasks are not aligned to support growth and learning. They're either too boring or too challenging and overwhelming. So on the one hand, you can't get that sense of mastery, competence that you can when the task is just right for you to actually stretch your skill. And on the other level, it can be too challenging and just very daunting to feel that you're not coping. With dyslexia, as I said there, that, you know, when the dyslexic brain, which is so brilliant, is made to feel like its strengths or that person's strengths are not as important as some of the things that are not so easy. Just one example. Autonomy, no choice on what to learn when, having to wear uniforms, timetables that others define, even curriculum. Relatedness, the power difference in itself between teacher and learner or parent and child can also create a gap in the relatedness, which is where you often find this competition or war between us and them. Grade segregation creates unhealthy power dynamics among children. Yeah, you never see that as much, as clearly as you do once you get into an age-mixed, self-directed setting and you watch that disappear. Then you kind of notice how much there otherwise. Children aren't able to talk to each other freely. They can't choose whom to associate with. They're limited in how they interact with others based on status, such as talking to an adult has to respect the authority, for example. Permission is required to go to the bathroom, eat, rest, play. And safety, punitive and coercive systems that demand that the young people submit to the demands of adults actually compromises their capacity for self-protection. And feeling safe has to follow the norm, and it's not neurodiverse friendly. An example there that we didn't bring in from the chat is maybe needing to hide under a blanket. And no choice not to go to school or to learn some things. Just going to quickly add that in there. Definitely to autonomy. Right. So yeah, lots of things, and there are even more. So this is just the start of a process. I would like to encourage everybody to maybe sort of take this as a little homework reflection. And if you like, it's an invitation. You could think more about your own specific circumstance. You could think about your own schooling and how that mapped onto here, but even more useful would be to think right now. To what extent are these core needs actually being met in your setting? If you are a facilitator, also for yourself, how does your interaction as a parent or as a teacher or as a self-directed education facilitator, how does that meet your own needs for these different core needs? And how much is your current setting meeting the needs of the young people who are with you in that scenario? Right, and then now let's quickly go back a couple of pages if you can find that little corner clicky. If you don't, bear with us, and then we will get when the recording, you're also welcome to review. But let's just go back to page 1 and have a quick look at those things to just review. So not being able to cope with the work. To me, that looks like competence, right? But there's also autonomy in there, because if I had been able to choose my work, I might be able to cope with it better. Feeling like I'm stupid or something is wrong with me is clearly, you know, dignity, also speaking to competence, autonomy, and relatedness, because how do I feel about the people who are getting me to feel that way? Bullying, safety, and relatedness. Boredom, again, competence, autonomy. Don't like the stuff being taught, autonomy, relatedness, competence. Toxic socialization environment with top-down interactions rather than horizontal and respectful interactions. Wow, I mean, it's got it all, hasn't it? You're denting all of those core needs there. Schools don't respect many children's rights. The rules and conditions to attend are ableist and not neurodiverse friendly. Yeah, again, kind of covering all of those. Adults' needs, adult society's needs and not children's needs. Again, that's going to be, you know, treating children like chattel, as Sifaan was saying, not really centering them. That hits their autonomy, their relatedness, their competence, their safety, their dignity in a fundamental way. Boring and not engaging, waste of time, competence and autonomy. Homework, wow, what an imposition. You know, completely dents your right to play, no respect for your autonomy. And then let's just have a look at this one here. Not supporting neurodiverse children with exceptional needs. So there again, that autonomy thing here, you treating somebody as if they are somebody else. Very destructive. And the child will just fall through the cracks because they're different. There's no resources, no funding, no support. I mean, that's just a fundamental abuse of so many rights, and a failure to, you know, a fundamental failure to let that child belong and count and be cared for, their dignity, everything. Exams, oh my gosh, exams are such an attack on competence, because exam writing skills are completely different to learning skills. I hate it when people conflate study skills and learning skills. You know, study skills help you cram right now to be able to write a test and then flush the stuff, which is the opposite of real long-term learning, which isn't tested by an exam at all. Having to do what you're told. I mean, wow, what a dent to your dignity, your autonomy, your relatedness, your competence, and again, setting you up for losing your safety. So what we see there again is that if we want to have thriving, we need to be meeting these needs. So when we look at ourselves as adult supporters not thriving, when we look at the children we're working with, the young people we're working with not thriving, we can always map it back to how are the core needs not being met. And you can also, in that sense, you can translate that into which rights are not being respected. So this is now our diagnostic tool. And you can also see why now we're not just doing one session, because this is already like quite a lot to cover. And over the next couple of sessions, we can unpack that to bring it more and more into practical day-to-day reality. So now we've had this aha that most education is not rights respecting. Not all rights are being met. We've had this aha that this is because, or it's equivalent to, means the same thing as the core needs are not being met, not being addressed. This is why there is a lack of thriving. What do we do about it? So, you know, the obvious answer is we simply start focusing on meeting all of the needs, or making sure that the education fulfills all of the rights. And instead of focusing on what the kids are going to learn and what they've got to teach and what the curriculum is, we simply drop all of that and focus on what their rights are, what their core needs are, and how we can meet those. But then, of course, comes the, but what happens then? Because we've been doing things this way, basically all of our lives, and all the people around us are doing it this way. What are the consequences? What happens if you drop everything else and you start just focusing on fulfilling rights and meeting needs? I mean, then what happens to their learning? Will they still learn to read? Will they still be able to go to university? I mean, it's all very nice in theory and on paper, and it sounds all very almost too good to be true to say that we could just have this incredible rights respecting, needs fulfilling environment and education would still be optimized. But that's definitely something that one doesn't want to just take at face value. We want some evidence. So in the next session, I will be touching on that evidence, because there are actually schools that do manage to do this. The question people always have that, well, why aren't schools already doing this? If it's such a good thing to do, there must be some reason they don't do it. The reason is partly just cultural, like we said earlier. It's like the colonizing process put this all over the world and made it normal. And now we have to actually question it when it's already there. But also because these systems are big. And it's very hard to actually meet core needs for an individual, for a series of individuals within a massive system. It's much easier to do on a smaller scale. And a big school system, especially an international one, is hard to turn around. If you think about that Titanic, they saw the iceberg, they wanted to avoid the iceberg, they couldn't miss the iceberg because they didn't have the maneuverability. If they'd been in a little dinghy boat, they could have easily steered away from the iceberg, right? So this school system is trying to turn itself around, which is also where we've got the latest United Nations documents, such as the Futures of Education document, which basically talks about rights and core needs in the same way that we are. And you've got the Youth Declaration that's just come out, which speaks about young people actually being the drivers of the transformation of education, not even, you know, sort of on a completely equal partner basis, but actually being the people who have the most capacity or should have the most capacity. So the system's trying to do it, but it's big and it's unwieldy. But there's a whole lot, there's 100 years of small schools and small educational settings, as well as family-based education, that have actually done it. And I will be going into what exactly is it that they do. What is the recipe? Because it's actually been written out. It's actually right there. There's a recipe that's common to all of these settings. And in the next session, we will be going into that. So I'm going to suggest we have a relaxed closing round in a minute, but I'm going to also just pop this right now as an invitation, and then we'll reiterate it later. But I'm going to suggest that if you would like to, between now and the next session, you could just bring it right down to reality and manageable bite-sized reality. What's one core need in your own life, for yourself or for a young person in your own life, one core need that could get one improvement in one practical way? What could that look like? So that's going to be my suggestion, and I'm going to just pop that right there in the chat like that, and I'm going to put the whiteboard back on for one more second to write it up there so that people can freeze the recording to get it as well. I'm just going to take page 4, so also add a page and just put that homeworkish type invitation. But you see, it's an invitation because you have your autonomy, your competence. You can decide if this makes sense for you to do, and you can choose whether you want to do it. Right. So there's that. Just giving it a second. And now I would like to invite anybody who would like to sort of check out to just briefly share either one thought that you're still having that you'd like to share, or a question that you'd like to pop in there for us to actually address in the next sessions, or you know, any closing thought that you'd like to put there in order to say goodbye for this time. So it's always optional. Would anybody like to take the floor? And if you want to do it after the recording stopped, just let me know, and we'll take a couple at the end after the recording stops. That's also fine. Fabienne.
No question, just a thank you to you both, and lovely to see everybody. And I guess what I'm taking away is how deep the in the cultural iceberg this all is, right? And that we see the manifested, which is 10%, and there's 90% that we don't see. So perhaps just noticing and going deeper down the culture iceberg is what I'm going to take from what you've shared with us.
And yeah, thank you for that, because I think that really is the case. You know, everybody who's freaking about the mental health crisis and the employment crisis and the AI crisis, that is, people think that's big, but you're right, that is only the tip that's showing. We can see what is underneath. Great. Would anybody else like to join the checkout? Okay, I'm going to give it 3 calls, and after that I'll stop the recording. Sifaan's also posting there a thought to explore later. A big part of the reason why the status quo doesn't really change is also because there's a lot of money and power vested in the current system. Yes, like the Titanic. There was a reason they didn't have enough lifeboats, for example. Right. And we've got some goodbyes coming also in the chat here. Yeah, the Teacher Savior Industrial Complex. Okay, second last call for anybody who'd like to check out in person before the recording stops. And final call for anyone who would like to check out before the recording stops. Going. All right, so we will still have a moment to check out once the recording has stopped. But for those of you watching the recording, I really look forward to maybe connecting with you in person on Tuesday. That'll be your opportunity again to be here if you can make it. And if you can't make it, we will keep sending you the recordings so that you can still catch up and get the ahas. And just really to invite you to also share, if you can't make it, but you would like to share your thoughts, or share your questions, or share your ahas from sort of doing the reflection, you can just, sorry, drop me an email, and then I can share it with the group with or without your name. And with that, we're going to stop the recording for today and see you on Tuesday.